Good afternoon, buenas tardes, Imanaya Kashanki Ayanchu. Greetings from Lima, Peru. My name is Howard Tsai, lecturer at the Center for Latin American and Caribbean Studies at the University of Michigan. Today, I have the distinct pleasure or opportunity to talk to Dr. Giancarlo Marcone, General Coordinator of the Qhapaq Ñan Project of the Peruvian Ministry of Culture. Qhapaq Ñan in Quechua means powerful or great road, which refers to the vast network of roads and highways built by the Inca Empire, spanning thousands of miles from Ecuador to Chile. Today, Dr. Marcone will talk to us about his project, Qhapaq Ñan, and what the project has discovered about this ancient system of highway and transportation and communication among the Inca Empire. Not only that, he'll speak to us about the significance and meaning of this road system to the modern contemporary communities of the Andes. Dr. Marcone, nice to talk to you today.
No, thank you for the invitation. I always like to talk about Qhapaq Ñan Project and the work that we are doing from the Ministry of Culture.
Can you tell us just a little bit about the background of Qhapaq Ñan? What are its aims, objectives, and goals?
The Qhapaq Ñan Project started in 2001 as part of a general promotion of several parts of Peru that were less developed in terms of heritage management. And from the beginning, they decided to make an international initiative, bringing together 6 countries of the region. So for the last 15 years, 6 countries were working together in present a nomination file for UNESCO for the declaration as a World Heritage. And that is one of the first powerful meanings of Qhapaq Ñan, because show that 6 countries can work for 15 years together in having a goal, a very clear goal, right? So even times when some of the countries were in armed conflict, we were able to keep the technical meetings and put together a document that is very extensive and very comprehensive with the 6 countries. That was a clear goal. And also the idea of have a same goal for 15 years in our countries tend to be unusual. Our countries have a lot of mobility in the persons that are in charge, like ministers, secretaries, by minister, even presidentes change very fast here. So it's very difficult to have a state program with goals, with the same goal for 15 years. That is other thing that when I first started in Qhapaq Ñan, really take my attention, right?
So, as you mentioned, this is a unique project in terms of these multinational cooperation. Are there any other aspect of Qhapaq Ñan project that makes it very special, makes it distinct from, let's say, the traditional archaeological project that focuses on one single archaeological site or one single archaeological region for a survey?
Right. That is also very different. Usually, when you talk about heritage management, you need to deal with a very restricted border kind of site, right? Qhapaq Ñan is actually siteless. We have sites there, but as you can imagine, the 3 or 2 meters that is the road by themselves is not really important, right? What is important is that this road is in the middle of landscape, a landscape that is still used, right? So one of the things that I started always with the new authorities when come is when I start and beginning their tenure, and they ask me, well, okay, what Qhapaq Ñan do? The first thing that I say, this is not a project about stones. It's not really about the archaeological remains of the ancient road. It's more about the landscape where this ancient road is, which is more or less all Peru. So it's kind of, I tend to say, neurotic, right? You need to try to keep tradition and the past in a national level in areas where the past is really the present, more or less, right? And some of the roads are still in use. Other roads are in conflict with new highways or with mining expansion. So we end up having a project of cultural landscape more than archaeological remaining as classic heritage consumption. No? And that make us to put more emphasis in the social aspects of the project. And I think the Qhapaq Ñan is making a big change in that sense because he's changing the perception of how heritage management should be work. Heritage management is not important by themselves, it's important only if they come back to people, right? If the heritage, the good, let's say, the site, have meaning only if what is happening in the site come back to everyday people, regular people. Sometimes in Peru we think the heritage management need to be linked with tourists, right? And yes, in some parts like in Cusco, what we can do in the Inca Road have a direct relation with how many people come or what the people that can do in Cusco and so on. But there is other areas in the Peru that is not gonna be tourists anytime soon because there is no road, there is no town, there is no hotels, but there is Qhapaq Ñan. And that is more interesting for us because that is when the heritage became public space, when the heritage became process, and Qhapaq Ñan is a way to link these populations sometimes forgotten by the state or outside of the scope of the formal state. And we are able to make this link in the state with these populations, with these communities, especially because heritage and culture discourses are nice discourses, are not contentious, right? So it's a good first step to talk with communities that sometimes feel forget for the state, or that have sometimes antagonic positions against the state, right? So Qhapaq Ñan discovered like a space there when we can make some links between communities and the state that I think is important, that I think is better. I think that this is also changing, and I told you before, changing the perception in general with heritage in Peru, no? And it's beginning to be less academic heritage and beginning to be more public, right? I think it's part of a movement where we professionals, we are losing some of the control over the heritage, and we are trying to make this heritage more participative.
Participator, yeah.
Yeah, we are dreaming. At some moment, we are able to co-management of the site with the local communities. That will be the ideal. We are far from that, but that is where we are working towards, right?
It's interesting that you mentioned Cusco, and I was just there. I guess I just took a plane down from Cusco, and here I am, and I saw some of the very interesting project. And here's a shout out to the team at Tipon in Cusco, who I saw. They had a wonderful multidisciplinary team, and they discovered something very fascinating. Was that the Qhapaq Ñan, the Inca road they're working on, was actually then used by the hacienda. So they were doing a project working on both the hacienda and the Inca road itself. And what they realized was that during the hacienda days, they expanded the Inca road a little bit. So it seems like there's a fascinating history of these roads itself, and not just from the Inca occupation, but it had a very long history about pre-Inca, Inca, colonial, down to modern times.
And that is actually true, and it's kind of with a whole theoretical thing that in archaeology is very old, but in heritage management is new, and that is the idea of landscape, right? The landscape is not this dead board where things happen. Landscape is active, right? So societies change landscape, but when the landscape is changed, that landscape is part of the constructions of society. No? And I always make this reference when the Spanish came with their horses and so on. They saw a road, and they understand that if you follow a road, you get to a city, right? So why not? Why don't use the same roads? Other example that I use a lot is when you are in a field day trip and you get to a desert, right? You can decide to cross that part of the desert forever you want, right? You're free to cross it and walk wherever you want. The second person need to make a choice or follow your steps or decide don't follow your steps, right? So that choice make the landscape stay alive, right? Every single decision that all the societies that came before and after the Incas need to deal or were influenced by the transformations of the landscape that the societies before did, right? Particularly in the case of modern Peru, we found a lot of similarities between, let's say, in the big scale, right? How the axis of movement were the same. Probably the highlands lose power for the coast in Peruvian times, but basically they pass for the same sites, right? We have a lot of superposition, so very close between roads, which is logic in the Andes because you don't have too many space for play, right? It's a very strange and irregular geography, and the landscape is difficult. So, yeah, we find a lot of evidence of continuity between the roads with little changes sometimes in the road. I like to talk about like two aspects of a road. One is the route, where the route is. I want to go to this point to other point, passing for this point, all right? And the other is what we call traza, which is the actual construction of the road, right? So what we found is that in historical times they changed the traza, so they changed the materials of the road, opening a little bit more, or put a curb more easy for the animals and the car. But the routes, where you go to point A to point B, that were basically similar in most parts of the Peru for at least the first 100 years, and then beginning to change. But they change for specific reasons. Actually, we are trying to put this idea that when you beginning to understand the road and study why the roads stay or change the route, you beginning to understand what we're changing at the moment, because all these changes of routes are directed, linked with political or ideology or cultural changes, right? So in some way we think that the roads are the marks that tell us the story of what happened in Peru, right? Every single culture and society left imprints in the landscape, and that imprints as the roads, right? And so, yeah, that we are trying to understand, and it's interesting because when you begin into this work, the road you change the scale, the time scale too. You need to begin to understand landscape in a temporal scale that is more wider, right? It's not just the 70, 80 years of the Incas. It's like 5,000 years of humans in the Andes, right? And we keep being part of the same process. These also have political implications, a very strong political implications, because what they tell us as official history was the Spanish were kind of new beginning, right? That everything ended and now we were criollos and not indigenous anymore, right? So that makes the story, Peruvian story, very fragmented, where local people were kept out of the picture, right? So the whole colony, local people were not in play. The whole independence process from Spain the local people were not there. So you read the books and there is no local people there, and that is something that we think change when you begin to understand landscape as a whole, and you beginning to see where the independence war happened, or where the even Sendero Luminoso kind of modern things, and they're still happening in the same roads, in the same areas, with local people. So I think that this idea to think in the Andes as pre-Hispanic, Hispanic, and Republican, like three independence and almost no related period of times, we should begin understanding it as a very big process when all the diversity of our person, of our people, take part. From the most Andean people that live in a small town in some hiding route, or the people that come from Spanish descendant in the late 90s that live in a city. It's a single story where all the diversity take part. But that is not how we build our story. Our story is building the, and it's an old phrase, Incas sí, indígenas no. Incas yes, but not indigenous, right? We like the idea of the Inca, the glorious Inca, that is not the guy that is living in our towns now, because in the middle the story broke. I think we need to change that. And the Incas and the people that build in the commerce are not the same people, but it's the same process, right? And that it's gonna allow us to make a more, well, not say, a better story of ourselves, right? In Peru, archaeology was used for build these colonial exclusionary discourses that white elites take power, right? And part of the discourses was the recognition of the Inca past, but denied that the present-day indigenous are really descendants of these Incas, right? So for you able to make that denial, you need to have a new beginning, right? A broken in the history. Even Tello say that. No, you can see in the work of Tello, even talking about how Andean persons were embrutecida.
Julio
Julio
the
Tello, the
Peruvian
famous archaeology. That is victim of their time. He's I don't want to talk bad about Tello. He's a clear mind that saw things before everybody else, right? But at that time, for many years, even intellectuals had this idea that this indigena was not the Inca, was the remnant, and say literally embrutecido, right? It's not the same guy. So who is the rightful heredero? Who is the rightful heirs of the Inca glorious? Is not the present-day indigenous, because they are now kind of little brothers. Is who? The mestizos, the elites, right? And that is how we play it. And we archaeologists, in general, that was played with the Incas. That was played with the Incas in archaeological sites. Peru built this classic discourse based in archaeology. So what I think in a deeper level, Qhapaq Ñan give an example of how things be completely different. Completely different. And that completely different comes from see the whole story as a process. And not because I say it, because you can look as a process in the landscape. More or less,
which makes it a very interesting project that Qhapaq Ñan is looking at the continuity of the use of these roads. It's not like an abandoned archaeological ruin that once abandoned, the previous culture never used it.
No,
but looking at the Qhapaq Ñan, the Inca road, you see a continuity of use by communities, by peoples.
In my logic, the continuity is the norm, right? You don't change a road unless you have a reason for changing, right? So the whole logic is inverse, right? So we expect a continuity between pre-Inca, Inca, and Hispanic times that you used to not think about that. We thought that the default is that discontinuity. right? I
You
think,
abandon a site.
they abandoned the site, abandoned this, abandoned that. I think that the default is a continuity, and we need to understand why they take the decisions to stop using this road for using the other. And when we understand the decision, we're going to understand, in a deeper level, Inca colonial strategies, Hispanic colonial strategies, even some Republican decisions, some present-day decisions. You understand in this logic, right? That is what we think, and we think that make the archaeological component of the Inca Road less cold and more present, more meaningful for the people. No?
Anything that greatly impressed you about the Inca road system? We had this conversation before about all the achievement of the Incas and how it is almost impossible to fit all that Sacsayhuaman, Cusco, Chinchero, Pisac, Machu Picchu, all that, whatever, within the traditional 60-year chronology, 70-year chronology of the Inca. And now you're on top of that, the Inca road system. How